The massive steel doors of Sector 7 hissed open as another transport ship landed on Titan base. Commander Blake Washington barely looked up from his data pad as he watched the latest group of refugees stumble down the landing ramp. Their clothes were torn, faces dirty, eyes hollow with the look of people who had lost everything. Another human colony wiped out by the Empire's expansion. Another batch of survivors to be processed and assigned work duties. "Same story every week," muttered Sergeant Tony Mitchell, checking names off his list. "Empire shows up, takes what they want, ships the leftovers here to work in the vaults." Blake nodded absently. After 15 years running refugee processing on Titan base, he'd seen thousands of broken families arrive at the galaxy's most secure facility. The Corvanian Empire called it a xenobiological preserve, but everyone knew what it really was: a prison for the last remaining creatures from worlds they'd conquered and destroyed. Deep beneath their feet, in levels most staff never saw, lay the Empire's greatest trophies. Creatures that had once soared through alien skies or ruled vast forests now sat motionless in quantum cages, slowly dying while scientists poked and prodded them for secrets. The saddest case of all was housed in the deepest vault of all. Dr. Jerome Davis pushed his glasses up his nose as he made his daily rounds through Level 12. 23 years he'd been studying the creature in Vault 12 Alpha, and every day it looked a little more lifeless. The dragon called Stormfire had been the Empire's greatest prize when they'd captured it 3 centuries ago. Back then, it had been magnificent, scales that shimmered like liquid gold, eyes that burned with inner fire, wings that could create storms with a single beat. Now it looked like a statue made of dull metal. The quantum chains wrapped around its massive form hummed constantly, draining away whatever cosmic energy had once made dragons the most feared beings in the galaxy. Jerome had read the old reports. Dragons could breathe fire that burned through starship hulls, fly faster than most fighters, and somehow bend space itself to travel between worlds instantly. The Empire had spent 200 years hunting them down, and Stormfire was the last one they'd found. "Still nothing today," Jerome murmured to his recording device as he checked the monitors. Heartbeat barely detectable. Brain activity minimal. Subject continues slow decline toward complete biological shutdown. He hated calling the dragon a subject, but Imperial regulations were strict. All specimens were to be referred to by classification numbers and clinical terms. Getting emotionally attached to the creatures was grounds for immediate transfer to a mining colony. Back on the surface, the newest group of refugees was being sorted into work assignments. Most adults went to maintenance crews or supply handling. The elderly were assigned to lighter duties in the upper levels. Children usually went to the education center where they learned Imperial standard and basic job skills. 8-year-old Destiny Brown held tight to her guardian's hand as they waited in the processing line. She'd been blind since birth, but her other senses had grown incredibly sharp to compensate. Right now, she could hear conversations from across the hangar, smell the metallic tang of ship fuel mixed with fierce sweat from the other refugees, and feel something else, something warm and sad calling to her from far below. "Next," called the processing officer. Destiny's guardian, Mrs. Jackson from their destroyed colony, stepped forward with the paperwork. "This is Destiny Brown, age 8. Parents deceased. I've been caring for her since the attack." "Medical issues?" the officer asked, barely looking up. "She's blind but very capable. Smart as a whip and never complains." The officer stamped a form. "Education Center, Level 3. Report to Supervisor Martinez at 0800 tomorrow." As they were led away to temporary quarters, Destiny kept turning her head toward the floor, as if she could see through all the metal and stone to whatever was calling her from the depths. Mrs. Jackson noticed but didn't say anything. The child had always been sensitive to things others couldn't perceive. On their home world, she'd been able to predict weather changes days in advance and somehow always knew when the supply ships were coming before they appeared on sensors. That night, as Mrs. Jackson slept in the narrow bunk beside her, Destiny lay awake listening to the sounds of the massive facility. Air recyclers hummed. Distant machinery clanked and whirred. Security guards made their rounds with heavy footsteps. But underneath it all, so faint others would never notice, she heard something else. A heartbeat. Slow, tired, but still beating. And with each beat, she felt that warm, sad presence calling to her, growing stronger despite the darkness and distance between them. 3 days into her stay at Titan Base, Destiny had already memorized every sound, smell, and vibration on Level 3. The education center was boring, just hours of learning Imperial Standard and basic mathematics. But at night, when the facility grew quiet, that warm presence from below called to her more strongly than ever. During lunch break on her fourth day, Destiny made her move. While the other children focused on their meal trays, she slipped away from the cafeteria. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold metal floors as she followed maintenance corridors she'd memorized by listening to repair crews. The facility's security system was designed to catch people trying to break in or escape, not a small blind girl moving quietly through service tunnels. Destiny's lack of sight actually helped. She navigated by touch and sound, avoiding the motion sensors that tracked visual movement. Level by level, she descended deeper into Titan Base. The air grew warmer and heavier. Strange smells drifted through the ventilation, ozone, exotic chemicals, and something else. Something alive but trapped. In Level 12, Dr. Jerome Davis was having the worst day of his career. The dragon's vital signs had dropped to critical levels overnight. After 23 years of study, it looked like Stormfire might finally die on his watch. He was so focused on his instruments that he didn't notice the small figure slip past his lab door. Destiny found Vault 12 Alpha by following the strongest pull of that warm, sad presence. The massive door was sealed with locks she couldn't see, but she pressed her small hands against the metal and whispered, "I know you're in there. I can feel you." The door's security scanner wasn't programmed to detect someone so young, especially not someone who posed no apparent threat. When Destiny traced her fingers along the door's edge, she found a maintenance access panel that had been left slightly loose. Her small hands squeezed through the gap, and she managed to crawl into the vault through a service duct. The chamber was enormous, filled with humming machinery and the blue glow of quantum field generators. But Destiny couldn't see any of that. What she felt was overwhelming sadness, centuries of loneliness and despair radiating from the center of the room. She walked forward slowly, hands outstretched, until her fingers touched something smooth and warm. Scales. Massive scales that seemed to pulse with faint life. "Stormfire," she whispered. The dragon's golden eyes opened for the first time in decades. Not just opened, they blazed with sudden awareness. The quantum chains around its body began to vibrate at frequencies that made the monitoring equipment scream warnings. Dr. Jerome burst into the vault just as every alarm in Level 12 started blaring. He expected to find equipment failure or maybe a security breach. Instead, he found an 8-year-old blind girl standing next to the most dangerous creature in Imperial custody, speaking to it in what sounded like old Earth languages. "Child, get away from there." Jerome shouted, but Destiny didn't move. "He's not dangerous," she said calmly, one small hand still resting on the dragon's snout. "He's just sad. They've kept him locked up so long he forgot how to dream." Stormfire's massive head turned toward Jerome, and for the first time in his career, the scientist saw intelligence in those ancient eyes. Not animal cunning but deep, thoughtful awareness. The dragon was looking at him like it understood every word being said. Security Chief Kenneth Williams arrived with a full tactical team, weapons drawn and ready to tranquilize both the child and the dragon if necessary. But what he saw stopped him cold. The most feared creature in the galaxy was being gentle as a lamb, careful not to move too quickly around the small girl. "How did she get in here?" Kenneth demanded. "I don't know," Jerome replied, his voice shaking. "But look at the readings. The dragon's vital signs just jumped to levels we haven't seen in 50 years. It's like she woke something up." Destiny was still talking to Stormfire, switching between languages that shouldn't exist, fragments of pre-contact human dialects that had supposedly been lost when Earth joined the galactic community. But somehow, impossibly, the dragon understood every word. "My grandmother used to tell me stories," Destiny said to the dragon, ignoring the crowd of armed guards behind her. "Stories about when the Sky People and the Fire People were friends. Before the Metal Men came and put everyone in cages." Stormfire's response was a low rumble that vibrated through the entire vault. Not a roar of anger or pain, but something that sounded almost like recognition. The quantum chains flickered. Just for a moment, but long enough for everyone to notice. Dr. Jerome's hands flew over his instruments, recording everything. After decades of studying a dying specimen, he was finally seeing what a living dragon looked like. And it was magnificent. The next morning brought chaos to Titan Base. Admiral Lisa Brooks stepped off her command shuttle with the kind of cold expression that made seasoned soldiers nervous. Word of the incident had reached Imperial High Command within hours, and she'd been sent to personally handle what they were calling a critical containment breach. Dr. Jerome Davis found himself in the worst position of his life, standing in Admiral Brooks' temporary command center trying to explain how an 8-year-old refugee had somehow awakened the galaxy's most dangerous prisoner. "Let me understand this correctly, Doctor," Admiral Brooks said, her voice sharp as a blade. "A blind human child walked through multiple security checkpoints, entered our most restricted vault, and somehow communicated with a creature that hasn't responded to anything in 3 centuries? That's essentially correct, Admiral, Jerome replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. But I think we're looking at this the wrong way. This could be the breakthrough we've been hoping for. Admiral Brooks pulled up holographic displays showing Stormfire's recent vital signs. The readings were off the charts. Energy levels that had been dormant for decades were suddenly spiking back to life. Doctor, this creature was captured after it single-handedly destroyed 3 Imperial battle cruisers. The only reason it's still alive is because we needed to study how to kill the rest of its kind. Now you're telling me it's waking up? Meanwhile, in a holding cell 3 levels up, Destiny Brown sat patiently while Security Chief Kenneth Williams tried to figure out what to do with her. She wasn't exactly a prisoner, she was just a child who'd wandered into the wrong place. But she was also the only person in 300 years who'd managed to get a reaction from Stormfire. Can you tell me how you knew the dragon's name? Kenneth asked gently. He had kids of his own and didn't like interrogating an 8-year-old, but orders were orders. Destiny tilted her head, considering the question. Same way you know your own name, I guess. Some things just are what they are, whether people remember or not. That afternoon, against direct orders from Admiral Brooks, Dr. Jerome arranged for one more session between Destiny and the dragon. He convinced himself it was for scientific purposes, but the truth was simpler. He'd spent 23 years watching a magnificent creature slowly die, and he couldn't bear to see it locked away again just when it was starting to live. The moment Destiny entered Vault 12 Alpha, Stormfire lifted its massive head and made that rumbling sound again. This time, Jerome was ready with full recording equipment. Tell me about the Sky People and Fire People, he said to Destiny as she approached the dragon. My great-great-grandmother told my great-grandmother who told my grandmother who told my mom, Destiny explained, settling down next to Stormfire's enormous front claw. Back when Earth was young, before the ships came from other worlds, humans lived alongside creatures of power. Dragons weren't enemies, they were partners. As she spoke, something incredible happened. The quantum chains binding Stormfire began to flicker more frequently. With each flicker, the dragon's scales grew brighter, more colorful. The dull gray metal was being replaced by brilliant gold and crimson. The Fire People could travel between stars using paths made of starlight, Destiny continued. And some humans could see those paths too. They flew together to other worlds, other places where the same kind of friendship existed. Jerome's instruments were going crazy. Energy readings unlike anything in Imperial records were emanating from the dragon. But more than that, similar energy signatures were starting to appear throughout the facility. In Vault 7 Beta, a crystalline creature from the Andromeda sector that hadn't moved in 50 years suddenly began to glow. In Vault 15 Gamma, something that looked like a giant butterfly made of pure light started beating its wings for the first time since capture. What's happening to the other specimens? Kenneth's voice crackled over the comm system. I don't know, Jerome replied, but that wasn't entirely true. Looking at his readings, he was starting to understand something the Empire had never considered. These creatures weren't just random monsters they'd collected. They were all connected somehow, part of an ancient network that spanned the galaxy. Destiny placed both hands on Stormfire's snout and closed her blind eyes. They made you forget, didn't they? Made you forget what you really are, what you're supposed to protect. The dragon's response shook the entire facility. Not a roar of anger, but something deeper, a sound like distant thunder mixed with singing wind. Every piece of quantum containment equipment on level 12 sparked and flickered. And for the first time in 3 centuries, Stormfire's wings twitched. Admiral Brooks felt the vibration in her command center 15 levels away and knew her worst fears were coming true. The creatures weren't just waking up, they were remembering. Admiral Brooks had seen enough. The readings coming from level 12 were beyond anything in Imperial records, and similar energy spikes were appearing throughout the facility. Creatures that hadn't moved in decades were stirring to life, and the quantum containment systems were struggling to hold them. Terminate the experiment, she ordered Dr. Jerome over the facility's communication system. Remove the child immediately and prepare the dragon for emergency sedation. But Jerome was watching something impossible happen before his eyes. As Destiny continued speaking to Stormfire in those ancient Earth languages, the dragon's quantum chains weren't just flickering anymore, they were starting to crack. Hairline fractures appeared in the crystalline bonds that had held the creature motionless for 3 centuries. Admiral, you need to see this, Jerome said into his comm device. The child isn't just communicating with the dragon. She's somehow helping it remember what it was before we captured it. Destiny stood up and placed her small hand on one of the cracked chains. They hurt you when they put these on, didn't they? Made you forget how to fly, how to breathe fire, how to talk to the stars. Stormfire's massive head nodded slowly, an unmistakably intelligent gesture that made every person watching through the security feeds hold their breath. Security Chief Kenneth Williams was already suiting up his tactical team when the first real sign of trouble appeared. In Vault 7 Beta, the crystalline creature had grown so bright that its containment field was overloading. Sparks flew from control panels as the being that looked like living diamond began to sing, a sound so pure and beautiful that it made hardened soldiers stop and listen. All teams to emergency positions, Kenneth ordered, but his voice lacked conviction. After 15 years of guarding sleeping monsters, he was unprepared for creatures that were waking up and didn't seem angry about their captivity, just sad. The moment Admiral Brooks entered Vault 12 Alpha with her personal guard unit, everything changed. Stormfire took one look at the Imperial insignia on her uniform and let out a roar that hadn't been heard in the galaxy for 300 years. The sound contained centuries of rage, loss, and defiance all rolled into one earth-shaking bellow. The quantum chains exploded. Fragments of crystalline metal flew in every direction as Stormfire rose to its full height for the first time since capture. 40 feet tall, with wings that spanned the entire vault, the dragon was magnificent and terrifying. Its scales blazed with inner fire, and its golden eyes burned with an intelligence that made Admiral Brooks take an involuntary step backward. "Stand down," she shouted to her guards who were raising their weapons. "Tranquilizer rounds only." But Destiny stepped between the soldiers and the dragon, her small form looking impossibly fragile next to the massive creature. "He won't hurt anyone unless you try to hurt us first," she said calmly. "He's not a monster. He's a guardian." The facility's alarms were screaming now as containment failures cascaded throughout the lower levels. The crystalline being in Vault 7 Beta had shattered its quantum prison and was floating freely, its song growing stronger. In other vaults, creatures that had been motionless for decades were stirring to life, and the energy readings were unlike anything Imperial science had ever recorded. Dr. Jerome stared at his instruments in amazement. "Admiral, the energy signatures, they're all connected. Every creature that's awakening is part of some kind of network we never detected." Stormfire spread its enormous wings and made a sound that was almost like speaking, not in any language Jerome recognized, but clearly directed at Destiny. The child nodded as if she understood perfectly. "He says the sleeping time is over," she translated. "He says his family is calling and he has to answer." "What family?" Admiral Brooks demanded. "We destroyed every dragon in the galaxy." Destiny smiled sadly. "Not every dragon, Admiral. You just made them hide very, very well." That's when the real shock came. Throughout the facility, human staff members were suddenly doubling over in pain, not physical pain but something deeper. Memories that weren't their own were flooding their minds. Kenneth Williams saw flashes of himself as a child on Earth, speaking to creatures made of starlight. Dr. Jerome remembered his grandfather telling stories about humans who could fly between worlds without ships. "What's happening to us?" Kenneth gasped, pressing his hands to his temples. Destiny looked directly at Admiral Brooks with those blind eyes that seemed to see everything. "You took humans from 100 worlds and brought them here to work with the creatures you captured. But you never realized that some humans and some of the star creatures used to be friends. Now that Stormfire is awake, he's helping people remember what they forgot." The dragon's wings began to glow with the same golden light that filled its eyes. The moment Stormfire's wings began to glow, something extraordinary happened throughout Titan Base. Every human who had been brought there as a refugee suddenly felt a warmth spreading through their chest, memories that belonged to their ancestors, knowledge that had been buried for generations under Imperial education and control. Mrs. Jackson, who had been caring for Destiny since their colony's destruction, found herself remembering her great-grandmother's stories about humans who could speak to the wind. Maintenance worker Robert Chin suddenly understood why he'd always felt drawn to the stars. Kitchen supervisor Angela Williams discovered she could sense the emotions of the creatures held in the lower vaults. But nowhere was the change more dramatic than in Vault 12 Alpha, where Admiral Brooks watched her perfectly ordered world fall apart. Stormfire wasn't just free, the dragon was communicating with every awakened creature in the facility through some kind of connection that existed beyond Imperial understanding. "Impossible," Admiral Brooks whispered as her instruments showed energy readings that broke every known law of physics. "We studied these creatures for centuries. There's no way they could coordinate like this." Destiny walked closer to the dragon's massive head, completely unafraid. "You never really studied them, Admiral. You just kept them like pets in cages." But Stormfire and his friends were never just animals. They're guardians of something much bigger than your empire. The dragon lowered its great head so Destiny could place her small hands on either side of its snout. When she did, golden light flowed between them, and suddenly every human in the facility could see what she saw, not with their eyes but with their hearts. They saw the galaxy as it had been before the Empire. Worlds where humans and star creatures lived in harmony, sharing knowledge and exploring the mysteries of space together. Dragons that carried human partners between solar systems. Crystalline beings that helped heal planets damaged by war. Creatures of pure energy that taught humans to speak the language of stars. Dr. Jerome was crying without realizing it as the visions filled his mind. We weren't conquering random worlds, he said in wonder. We were destroying a civilization. An alliance that spanned the entire galaxy. Security Chief Kenneth lowered his weapon, no longer able to see the creatures as prisoners. How many worlds did we break apart? How many partnerships did we destroy? Admiral Brooks tried to maintain control, but her own memories were surfacing now. As a child on the Imperial capital world, she dreamed of flying among the stars without a ship. Her grandmother had sung her lullabies about creatures made of starlight. Dreams and stories the Empire had taught her to forget as primitive nonsense. Stormfire spread its wings wider, and the golden glow intensified. Throughout the facility, quantum containment fields began failing one by one. But instead of chaos there was coordination. Each freed creature moved with purpose, helping others break free while being careful not to harm the human staff. They could have killed us all the moment they woke up, Kenneth realized. But they're protecting us instead. The crystalline being from Vault 7 Beta floated into the dragon's chamber, its song now clearly recognizable as a form of communication. Behind it came others, a creature that looked like living water, something resembling a small star, beings of pure light that danced through the air like butterflies made of fire. Destiny turned to face Admiral Brooks, and for the first time the child looked older than her 8 years. They're not escaping, Admiral. They're going home. And they want to take their human friends with them. What are you talking about? Admiral Brooks demanded, though her voice shook. The humans who work here, the refugees you brought from destroyed colonies, they're not random people, Destiny explained. They're descendants of the old partnerships. Deep down they remember what their families used to be. As if to prove her point, maintenance worker Tony Rodriguez stepped forward. Without knowing how or why, he began speaking in a language that sounded like wind chimes and flowing water. The star-like creature immediately responded with pulses of warm light. Throughout the base, similar scenes were playing out. Humans were discovering they could communicate with specific creatures, forming bonds that felt both new and ancient. It wasn't magic, it was memory, genetic knowledge passed down through generations but suppressed by Imperial conditioning. Admiral Brooks felt her worldview crumbling. The Empire will send fleets. They'll hunt you down and destroy you all over again. Stormfire made that rumbling sound that meant agreement, but there was no fear in it. The dragon looked at Destiny, who nodded and smiled. Let them come, the child said simply. But this time they won't be fighting sleeping prisoners in cages. They'll be facing the galaxy's true guardians, awake and free and fighting alongside their human partners. The dragon's wings beat once, creating a wind that felt like freedom itself.